All right, everybody, we are back with another free live stream. Welcome, everybody. We're all set and ready. So today, just want to go through a couple different things. Took an excellent A-plus quality trade this morning on NASDAQ, which netted me a beautiful $1,300 in just under 20 minutes of trading. So just want to start out this live by going through what that $1,300 trade looked like, where my bias lied, how I actually took my execution for my trade, and then we'll go a little bit more into some live trading recaps. What was market doing today? Where can we anticipate market going tomorrow? And stuff like that. So should be a lot of fun here. So let's get started. And if at any point any of you have any questions while I'm explaining a topic, do not hesitate to put it in the chat. I'm here to answer all of your questions. And so please let me know if you have any questions on any of the content that we are covering. So just want to get into it right now with a beautiful trade I'd taken on NASDAQ this morning on the 5-minute and 1 hour time frame. Took a beautiful long by utilizing a mix between the fractal model and also a breaker block strategy. What's up, Zinc? Welcome. Alrighty, so just getting into it here. Where was market with Tuesday and Wednesday market, right? Because when we have sessions, when we have these Asia, these London and New York sessions, it's important to do some previous market analysis to determine where we can potentially see market going in the future. So taking a look here, I've got this nice thing. It's the Lux Algo Sessions Indicator. Just gives me a really nice open for letting me know where different sessions open and close. And so let's go through what we see here. Well, last night we had that Asia session open at 8 p.m. PST and closing at that 5 a.m. PST window. What does that look like for, or EST, apologies. So what does that look like for us as a trader? Well, when we look for Asia session, it's really important for us to realize what Asia might be doing, because sometimes Asia session can be kind of aggressive and make some move to the upside or the downside, but you also have periods of time where Asia session becomes an accumulation phase prior to the next market leg that presents itself during the London session. And here, as we can see, what did we notice with this Asia session? Well, we can tell that there wasn't a lot of really good price action. And so what this was notifying me as a futures trader was that Asia was just accumulating prior to having some move occur on the hourly or smaller time frame with a future session, and in this case being the London and New York open sessions. So just to reiterate once again, Asia ended up having this really long accumulation phase where market really wasn't making any direction, right? If I'm just to draw out a little rectangle here, if we just look at this range, Asia was basically accumulating in this range until we finally had that London open where market decided to make a move. And so if we were just to chart this out before that London open, we had our previous Asia low. So I'm just going to actually mark this out right now, and we'll just go through the entire process of what my trade looked like from the start to the end. So here we see Asia had created a nice low on this 5-minute time frame in this accumulation phase. And so when I'm looking for this London open to occur, you typically want to see one side of the range get tested within London prior to New York finally making its move. As a lot of us, I'm sure, are not awake, typically I do not trade the 3 to 5 a.m. EST window, since that is the dead middle of night for myself. But it's important for me when I wake up in the morning for this New York session to realize what London may have done. That way I can identify what New York session may do. And so with this Asia session, we saw this accumulation, and now we just want to wait to see what London session does. And here we see right off the bat with this London session, London decided to immediately test that Asia low, created new lows on Asia session, which also created new lows on this London session. And when we see this market here, London finally created an increased move to the downside, right? Or not an increased move, but we had a steady move to the downside here on this 5-minute time frame. And so if I were to just mark this out, we had a change of state of delivery form in this London session because we had swept some type of low and we had this change in state form on this 5-minute time frame. And so although I was not trading this window, it was really nice for me to see, well, we had this nice bullish up close candle followed by a bearish close below this change in state, giving me the validation as a trader that we will see continued downside movement. And as we see here with this change in state of delivery, the second we got that 5-minute close, this presents a short opportunity on London. Once again, this was not a trade I've taken. I took, but if we just put that stop at that high, at that change in state of delivery high, we can now target a 2-to-1 risk to reward ratio, which actually ended up executing perfectly here on the 5-minute time frame. But let's say we weren't targeting a 2-to-1 and instead wanted to look at where trend could potentially go. Well, we have a couple different areas of interest, right? Clearly here, from this previous New York and London session, what do we see down at these lows? Well, we see liquidity pooling down at these lows. So it's important that we mark these areas out prior to new day market, because these are all areas where market might want to retest prior to having some type of move to the upside or downside. So we mark out this liquidity here. And so when we see these Asia lows get tested, and finally with a change in state of delivery to the downside, we can anticipate market to move towards this liquidity. So we've got micro liquidity here where we have these smaller wicks that ended up being areas of retest, and also these breaker blocks that had formed, or you have this more major liquidity that forms in that range. And here we see it's marked out with this X. And so with this Asia and London session, where can we see market going? Well, we can see market retesting this liquidity down here. And we'll see what happens here with this London session, just kind of let it play out, right? Because here, obviously, we're not in the process of trading this London session because it was too early in the morning. And so I'm just using London to give me some type of bias when it comes to this New York session. And here we see here, what does London decide to do? Well, London finally retests this external range liquidity that we see forming here. And so we broke down a very beautiful trade here where we had found that change in state of delivery that had formed off of those Asia lows, sweeping those Asia lows and giving us a confirmation bearish close to the downside, giving us more confirmation of potential downside movement. And here we see finally that liquidity had gotten retested, and we see market finally decide to pop here. And so this London session had a nice move to the downside, which is considered kind of, in a way, it's not a London reversal, but we have more of an aggressive move on London form. Now, where does the important session lie? Well, as I've mentioned, we want to wait to see this New York session open, which we see happen here, right? New York session is typically the window in which all of us end up trading, because that's when all of us are awake. So where do I look for these trades, and how can I potentially see a trade setup form? Well, here we see that New York session opens. And what does New York session decide to do? New York session decides to retest this London low, right? So I'll even mark this out, this London low, which was formed on the 5-minute time frame. And so when I'm looking for a trade setup here, there's a couple different things I can see. Either I want to look for a closure below this London low to see potential continuation lower, or I want to map out previous market to see where potentially we can see market lie. And if I just move to this hourly time frame here, what do we see is happening on this hourly? Well, as you see with all of these major wicks, we have liquidity that is forming at all of these areas of interest. And so here with this London session and open of this New York session on the hourly, we see that we actually swept quite a bit of this liquidity. And if I were to just draw out a little rectangle here, just for you guys to see this more visually, if I draw out this rectangle and we just put this here, we see in a way we kind of swept this demand. And so where can I anticipate market going? Well, if I got an hourly closure below this demand, this is where you can actually see a continuation into lower liquidity in the range. Because if you get a closure below a demand or a supply or some type of support and resistance, typically you'll see a closure, a retest of it, and a continuation lower. And so here, look what happens on the hourly. Well, we swept this demand, had swept this liquidity, this actual external range liquidity, and rejected back above. And so what was I watching for now on this time frame? Well, I moved to a smaller time frame to see if I could find any type of change in state of delivery form. As a lot of you know from my trading strategy and what's been working very well, I utilize a liquidity sweep or a sweep of one side of the range. And so in this example, being the London low being swept, as you can see with this 2 bearish closure, I'm looking for a session to get swept, a session high or low get swept, and then pair it with a change in state of delivery and a potential breaker block for me to identify an A+ trade setup. And so here we see New York opens. We retest this London low, get a 5-minute closure below, followed by a continuation, and I was not in any trade setup here because what I was looking for was to either see two things. I wanted to either see confirmation of New York continuation, where the session was going to drop lower, but because if we looked at that hourly, we were at an area of hourly liquidity. And so when you're at an area of high interest liquidity, you can typically anticipate market to reject back up. And so being the trader that I was, I decided not to enter any short position on NASDAQ at the New York Open because of this area of liquidity. If we had no liquidity on a higher time frame, that would have given me a lot more confidence to see market and see New York continue lower into lower liquidity outside of the range. But here on this internal range, we had liquidity that was pooling and we retested it. So what was I watching for now? I wanted to see a change in state of delivery form on the 5-minute time frame. And so we'll just let this market play out right now to see what happens, right? So if we just look at this 5-minute time frame, what happens here, right? We saw that we had created and swept this London low, right? And so here is what we consider a change in state of delivery. This 2-candle bearish closure is considered a change in state of delivery because we have now swept some type of low. And so if we see a closure back above, we are technically breaking out of this downtrend, right? And if I were to just give you guys an example of what a trend looks like, if I just draw a downtrend, right? If I draw a downtrend or if I draw an uptrend, what do we typically see with trend like this? And an example would be these lower lows, higher lows, and lower lows. And so if I look at this downtrend here, I see we've created trend and we've now created a lower low, a higher low, a lower low, a higher low, and a lower low, because we are creating a consistent trend. And if you want to see a bearish trend, you typically want to see market continue to create newer lows and newer lower highs and newer lower lows. Versus when we look at an uptrend now, what do we want to see with an uptrend? Well, we want to see the opposite. We want to see market retain a higher amount of movement. And so we want to see a higher low, a higher high, a higher low, higher high, higher low, higher high. And if we just look at this London session, look at what we were creating here. Well, we created lower low, lower high, lower low, lower high, lower low. And I could just follow this all the way down on this trend, right? All the way down until we get to this London low sweep. And so when I'm looking for this, when you break out of a change in state of delivery, you are technically breaking out of a given trend. And so an example is if market, right, if we have this high that was created, if market decides to break above, retest, and continue, you have now officially broken out of a downtrend. And this right here can be considered a change in state of delivery, right? So how did I utilize this change of state of delivery for my entry model? Well, as I'd mentioned on this 5-minute time frame, what did we see happened here? Well, we saw this London low get swept. We also saw this hourly liquidity get swept, and then we saw a closure of the 5-minute time frame on this change in state of delivery. So what does that mean for me as a trader? Well, that means that I can now anticipate price to move higher. And so look what happens here, and I'll even draw this out too. We also had a beautiful breaker block that had formed right here. And so I'll get a little rectangle tool to showcase this. And I'm gonna draw this out, right? Here we have a breaker block that had formed. I'm gonna mark this out on my time frame. And so what do we see here with this confluence? Well, on the 5-minute time frame, we saw multiple things happen. First of all, we saw liquidity get swept. And we'll actually write this out for you guys so it's gonna be a little easier to understand. So first of all, we saw liquidity being swept. Okay, so this was the first area of confluence, and this liquidity being swept was that London low. Okay, now what did we see happen next? Well, we saw that liquidity be swept, and then we saw a change in state of delivery form, so a CISD form on the 5-minute time frame. We also saw 1-hour liquidity get swept on top of this London low. So we saw 2 areas of high interest liquidity get swept. Then what else did we see? We saw that change in state of delivery form on the 5-minute time frame. And so we saw a 5-minute time frame form, and then we saw a closure of that 5-minute change in state of delivery. A closure of that 5-minute change in state of delivery. Now, what is another thing that I saw? Well, I saw a breaker block form with a closure above a 5-minute breaker block. And so what does this mean for me as a trader? Well, this has now officially aligned all my areas of confluence for this given trade. I have seen liquidity get swept, a change of state of delivery form, a closure above this change of state of delivery, and in the same 5-minute candle saw a closure above this bullish breaker block, which now gives me 3 areas of confluence within my model being the fractal model with breaker block and SMT, form on this 5-minute. And so what does that allow me to do now? That gives me an entry signature into longs, right? And so now that I have entered this position, where does my risk lie in this long position? I had taken my entry at the closure of this 5-minute into the next 5-minute candle, with my stop loss being just about a tick below that breaker block. Because if we saw market retest and get a closure below this breaker block, we can now assume that this change in state of delivery and that this liquidity sweep may have just been an aggressive 930 open move without any continuation higher. And so instead we would just see a closure back below these London and 1-hour liquidity lows with a continuation lower. But that's not what we ended up seeing. We ended up seeing a closure above and then this retest. And so now, where does my stop loss lie? As I mentioned, my stop loss would be just below that breaker. Oh, let me just move that properly. Just below that breaker block. My apologies. Just below this breaker block here, we would have that stop loss. And then that take profit would be targeting a 2-to-1 risk to reward ratio. So we just drag this up to a 2-to-1. But in this example here, and this is why I'll showcase why this was a different trade for me. Okay, it clearly doesn't want to show, so we'll just do this right now. What am I looking for now? Well, since we have now closed above this bullish breaker and this change in state and swept some type of high interest liquidity, I can anticipate 2 things. Either I can shoot for a 2-to-1 risk to reward ratio like you see in this trade, or what I had done this morning was I was excited to see this as a potential New York reversal, where London created a bearish trend and New York gave an open reversal signature to potentially retest London highs and potentially Asia highs. And so I actually put my maximum take profit at that London high. And so now we'll let this trade play out. We'll just pretend we have our stop loss set below and then our take profit at the London highs, which it's not letting me do. So we'll just let this play out exactly how it is. And so what do we notice here? Market aggressively makes a move. And let's see if we end up getting tagged out at that London high. And here we see we're approaching that London high. And right around here, we retest, and we get a closure at that London high, bringing this trade to a 3.5821 RR trade. And this trade here made me a beautiful $1,338, or it was, yeah, $1,383.60 on this trade. And so this right here would be considered an A+ quality trade for myself because I have now officially aligned all my areas of confluence within my model, right? We saw liquidity get swept, a 5-minute change in state of delivery. We also saw a 1-hour liquidity get swept, a closure of that change in state, and then also a closure above this bullish breaker block. So now all these areas of confluence aligned, which gave me the confidence to enter in those NASDAQ long positions where I was risking a 46.25 point position to potentially make 165 points. And as we see here, that trade worked out perfectly. And the craziest thing is this trade actually worked out in just less than 30 minutes. So that is my recap from today's trade for my NASDAQ long position. And yeah, so that's the first bit of this live. Did we have any questions before I continue here? Feel free to ask me any questions you might have. But this right here would be considered an A+ model.